I never planned to cross paths with the Mafia, and I didn't wake up one day deciding to step into danger. My life before all of this was ordinary, slow, and predictable. I had routines, familiar streets, people who knew my name, and problems that felt normal for someone just trying to get by. Money was always a concern, but it wasn't desperation. It was the kind of pressure most people live with quietly. I believed that if I worked a little harder and stayed patient, things would improve. That belief is what made everything that followed possible. The first connection came through someone I trusted, someone who framed it as help, not risk. A simple introduction to people who could make things easier. At first, it really did feel easier. Small favors were asked. Favors that didn't feel illegal or dangerous. Deliver something, pass a message, be present. Nothing that felt like a crime, nothing that raised alarms. The rewards came faster than normal life ever allowed. Bills were paid, stress faded. I felt like I had finally stepped onto a smoother road. What I didn't understand was that smooth roads often lead somewhere you didn't plan to go. Slowly, without any clear moment of choice, favors became expectations. Expectations became obligations. The tone changed, not sharply, but enough to feel it in the air. Smiles remained, but they felt measured. Conversations felt rehearsed. I noticed that saying no wasn't directly forbidden, but it carried weight, a silent weight, the kind that presses on your chest without making a sound. One night, someone mentioned something personal about my life that I had never shared with them, not as a threat, just casually. That moment rewired my understanding of where I stood. They weren't just connected, they were informed, watching, observing. My life didn't collapse suddenly, it thinned. Friends drifted because I was busy. Family noticed I was distracted, always alert, always checking my phone. I stopped being present, I became reactive. I waited for messages, calls, instructions. I told myself I could walk away if I wanted. That belief lasted until fear stopped being an emotion and became a constant state. I noticed cars more than faces. I memorized license plates without trying. Phone calls made my heart tighten. Unknown numbers felt like warnings. Even familiar voices carried tension. Knocks on the door felt heavier than they should. I learned to control my face while my body panicked. Paranoia became a survival skill. I checked reflections in glass, changed routes, avoided patterns without consciously deciding to do so. The scariest part wasn't open threats, it was silence. Silence meant they didn't need to explain anything. Silence meant decisions were being made without me. I realized how replaceable I was. I wasn't important, I was useful, and usefulness expires. Sleep became shallow. My mind replayed conversations endlessly, searching for hidden meanings. Sometimes I found them, sometimes I created them. Either way, rest disappeared. The mistake that changed everything was small, human, and irreversible. A misunderstanding, or maybe something that didn't matter at all. In that world, truth doesn't protect you, perception does. After that moment, everything cooled. Calls shortened, meetings felt colder. I noticed I was excluded. Then came the look. Not anger, not rage, calculation. That look told me everything. No accusations followed, no explanations. And that's how I knew I was in danger. Explanations are for people who still matter. From that point on, time felt borrowed. Each day felt like extra life I wasn't guaranteed. I thought about exits constantly, about what would happen if I stayed, about whether loyalty could be proven again, but I knew the truth. Once doubt enters that world, it never leaves. Staying wasn't brave, it was fatal. That was when fear stopped shouting and started speaking clearly. I understood that hiding within the same life wouldn't save me. Changing phones or cities wouldn't be enough. Patterns needed to be erased, not adjusted. Disappearing meant losing everything familiar: my name, my history, my relationships. I argued with myself every night, asking if I was overreacting. But silence, distance, and cold behavior aren't warnings, they are conclusions. That's when escape stopped being an idea and became a plan. Not a rushed one. Panic attracts attention. I moved slowly, quietly. I studied how real disappearances work, not movies, real failures, real survivors. I learned that habits are the biggest enemy. Repetition creates maps. I reduced my digital footprint carefully, slowly, no sudden changes. Money was handled in pieces, never predictably, never in one place. I prepared mentally more than physically. Disappearing isn't freedom, it's isolation, it's silence, it's discipline. I trained myself to need less, to expect nothing, to be invisible. There was no date at first, only conditions, and when those conditions appeared, I didn't hesitate. Cutting connections hurt more than fear ever did. You can't say goodbye. Goodbyes create questions. Questions create searches. Silence was the only protection I could give people I cared about. I became distant, hard to reach. People assumed life happened. Family was the hardest. Every instinct wanted to warn them, but ignorance kept them safe. I destroyed routines piece by piece, sleep times, routes, habits. By the end, I felt hollow. I walked familiar streets knowing I would never return. I wasn't gone yet, but I was already erased. The day I vanished didn't feel dramatic. It felt unnaturally quiet, and that silence was terrifying. Every movement felt louder than it was. I followed the plan exactly, even though my hands shook. I didn't rush. Rushing creates mistakes, and mistakes end lives. I carried only what mattered. Everything else was already dead weight. I didn't look back, because hesitation is dangerous. As distance grew, my identity began to dissolve. No messages, no calls, no signals. The world kept moving, unaware that one person had just erased himself. Relief didn't come immediately. Fear followed me into disappearance. It always does. Disappearing doesn't mean safety. It means uncertainty. Close calls came quietly. Small reflexes almost exposed me. Turning when someone said my old name, recognizing voices too quickly, forgetting which version of myself I was meant to be. Each mistake taught discipline. Emotion became a liability. Curiosity became a threat. Familiarity became a trap. Paranoia didn't disappear, it sharpened. I learned when to listen to it and when to control it. Living under pressure taught balance. The new identity felt fake at first, like wearing someone else's skin. Even saying my new name took effort. Documents were easier than behavior. Behavior exposes you faster than paperwork ever will. I learned to talk less. Quiet people are remembered less. I listened more. Listening gives control without attention. I avoided deep connections. Attachment creates patterns. Patterns can be tracked. Loneliness became normal. Silence stopped hurting and started numbing. Trust became dangerous. Kindness made me cautious. Over time, the identity stopped feeling fake. It didn't feel real either. It felt functional, and functionality kept me alive. Survival came with a psychological cost. Sleep was never deep. Part of me stayed awake, listening. Calm felt suspicious. Guilt followed me quietly. Guilt for leaving without answers. Guilt for choosing myself. Guilt for surviving. Trauma waited. It surfaced in dreams, tension, sudden fear. Danger leaving doesn't mean trauma leaves with it. Time, not distance, removed me from their radar. I stayed boring, unnoticeable, forgettable. Eventually, I realized I was no longer interesting. That realization felt like release. Rebuilding life meant simplicity, quiet routines, stability instead of recognition, peace instead of success. The past stayed behind me. Fear taught me clarity. Freedom proved fragile. Most danger arrives as opportunity. Looking back became possible only when I stopped looking over my shoulder. I never returned. Some doors must stay closed. Disappearing saved my life. It cost everything else. Freedom demanded silence, sacrifice, and strength. I vanished to live, and living quietly was a price I accepted. After enough time passed, fear stopped being the main thing guiding my days. It didn't disappear, but it moved to the background, like a low sound you stop noticing until it suddenly gets louder. What replaced fear was discipline. Discipline in how I lived, how I spoke, how I reacted, and even how I thought. Every decision went through the same question first. Does this make me visible or invisible? Visibility became the enemy. I chose places where people didn't ask questions. I chose work that didn't require explanations. I chose routines that blended into noise instead of standing out. I learned that most people are focused on themselves, and that helped me hide. Still, the mind doesn't reset just because life looks calm on the outside. My body stayed tense even when nothing was happening. Loud sounds made me alert. Sudden movements pulled my attention instantly. I avoided crowds not because I was afraid of being found, but because crowds increase unpredictability. Unpredictability removes control. Control was the only thing that kept me grounded. I trained myself to stay emotionally flat in public. No strong reactions, no visible anger, no excitement. Emotional extremes attract attention. I learned to keep conversations shallow. People love to talk about themselves, and letting them do that made me disappear in plain sight. At night, when everything was quiet, my thoughts became louder. That's when memories surfaced. Faces, voices, streets, moments that no longer belonged to me. Sometimes I questioned if I had exaggerated the danger. That doubt always faded when I remembered the silence, the cold shift, the calculating look. That world doesn't forget easily, but it does move on when you stop being useful or interesting. Time worked in my favor only because I respected it. I didn't rush comfort. I didn't rush connection. I stayed patient even when loneliness felt heavy. Loneliness was safer than familiarity. Slowly, I allowed myself small pieces of normal life, a routine meal, a regular walk, a place where my presence didn't matter. These things seem small, but they rebuild stability. I learned to enjoy being unremarkable. I learned that peace doesn't feel exciting when you're used to danger. It feels empty at first, then it feels calm. Healing didn't arrive as a clear moment. It arrived in fragments. A night of full sleep, a day without tension, a moment when my mind didn't scan the room automatically. Trauma doesn't leave suddenly. It loosens its grip slowly when it realizes there is no immediate threat. I accepted that parts of me would always stay alert. That didn't mean I was broken. It meant I had survived. I also learned something important about identity. Identity isn't just a name or a past. It's habits, reactions, values. When I lost my old identity, I didn't lose myself completely. I stripped myself down to what mattered. I became quieter, more observant, more controlled. These traits stayed with me. I stopped measuring life by ambition or status.
I measured it by safety and clarity. I stopped chasing validation. Being unnoticed became the goal. Over time, the idea of returning stopped visiting my mind, not because I was afraid, but because there was nothing left to return to. That chapter had closed itself. I accepted that some experiences don't teach lessons gently, they carve them into you. I stopped asking why it happened. Survival doesn't need answers, it needs acceptance. I built a life that couldn't be traced back emotionally or practically. I didn't talk about the past. I didn't revisit places in memory unless they came on their own. I learned that silence can be powerful, not as fear, but as choice. Silence gave me space. Space gave me peace. Peace allowed me to breathe again without thinking about it. That was when I realized I had crossed a second invisible line, not the line of disappearance, but the line of survival turning into living.
With time, I stopped thinking of my escape as a dramatic event and started seeing it as a long process that never really ends. Disappearing wasn't a single decision I made once. It was a choice I kept making every day after that, sometimes consciously and sometimes without thinking. Each morning, I chose caution over comfort. Each interaction, I chose control over emotion. This constant awareness shaped the way I saw the world. I became more patient, not because I wanted to be, but because impatience creates mistakes. I learned to accept slow progress. Fast change attracts attention. Slow change fades into the background. I watched people rush their lives, chasing success, recognition, excitement, and I realized how exposed that made them. Attention is a double-edged thing. People want to be seen until being seen becomes dangerous. I learned to exist quietly, and in that quiet, I found a strange kind of strength. I stopped explaining myself to others. Explanations are a form of exposure. I kept my answers simple, my stories short, my presence light. Over time, people stopped asking questions, not because they trusted me deeply, but because there was nothing interesting to question. Being boring became a form of protection. Emotionally, I rebuilt myself slowly. I allowed myself to feel again, but carefully. Fear never fully left me, but it stopped controlling me. It became a reminder instead of a prison. I accepted that parts of my mind were permanently changed. Sudden noises still pulled my attention. Silence still felt safer than noise. I stopped fighting those instincts. They had kept me alive. I learned to respect them without letting them dominate me. I also learned forgiveness, not for the people who put me in danger, but for myself, for the choices I made when I didn't fully understand the cost. Regret is heavy, and carrying it forever only adds another prison. I chose to let it go, piece by piece. I didn't rewrite my past, I accepted it. I understood that survival doesn't come from perfect decisions, but from adapting when decisions go wrong. Over time, I built something that felt like a life again, not the life I once had, but one that fit who I had become. I found value in simplicity. I found comfort in routine. I found peace in being unknown. I stopped measuring myself against others. Comparison creates dissatisfaction, and dissatisfaction leads to careless choices. I focused on stability instead of ambition. That choice alone changed everything. The longer I stayed invisible, the safer I became. Time did what distance alone never could. It erased urgency. It erased interest. It erased relevance. Eventually, my old life became just another forgotten detail in a world that always moves forward. I realized that most people aren't remembered for long, and in my case, that was a blessing. I didn't need closure from the past. I needed separation from it. And separation doesn't come from understanding everything. It comes from acceptance. I accepted that I would never explain thy disappearance to those I left behind. That pain stayed with me, but it softened with time. I learned that protecting people sometimes means staying away from them. I stopped imagining alternate endings. Imagining different outcomes is a luxury for people who are safe. I focused on what was real, what was now, and what kept me alive. The world felt smaller but clearer. I wasn't chasing happiness anymore. I was maintaining peace. And peace, I learned, is quieter than happiness, but far more stable. Looking back now, I understand that my escape wasn't about running away from the Mafia alone. It was about running away from a version of myself that believed danger always announces itself clearly. It doesn't. Danger often arrives as opportunity, as help, as an easier path. That is the lesson I carry most carefully. The world is full of shortcuts that come with invisible costs. I paid mine in silence, isolation, and loss, but I paid it with my life intact. Freedom, I learned, is not loud. It doesn't celebrate. It doesn't announce victory. Freedom is waking up without fear controlling your decisions. It's walking through a day without scanning every face. It's sleeping without listening for threats. I vanished so I could experience those things again, even if they came in smaller amounts than before. I accepted that my story would never be told publicly, that my name would never be associated with survival or bravery. I didn't need recognition. Survival doesn't require applause. It requires endurance. I learned that some battles are won by leaving, not fighting. Staying would have made me a statistic. Leaving made me a ghost, and being a ghost kept me alive. I don't romanticize disappearance. It is lonely. It is heavy. It reshapes you in ways you don't expect. But it also teaches clarity. It strips life down to essentials: safety, awareness, control, choice. I no longer chase excitement. I no longer crave intensity. I have seen what intensity can cost. I choose calm. I choose distance. I choose quiet strength. If there is a warning in my story, it is this: not all traps look like traps. Some look like opportunity. Some look like help. Some look like progress. Pay attention to silence. Pay attention to shifts in tone. Pay attention when trust becomes conditional. And most importantly, understand that survival sometimes requires disappearing from a life you once thought you needed. I vanished from their radar, not through speed or force, but through patience, discipline, and time. Time erased my shadow. Silence protected my path. Distance rebuilt my future. I lost my old life completely, but I gained something rarer: the ability to live without fear deciding for me. Freedom cost me everything familiar, but it gave me something priceless: another chance to exist, quietly on my own terms.